pattern is going to be the Royal Trude. I've got a size 16 extra long hook in my vise. And I want to start my thread at about the 2/3 point because I'm going to use that as a measurement for where I want my abdomen on this fly to start. And then I'm just going to wrap backwards to where the barb of the hook would be. I've taken the barb off of this, or tried to mash it down anyways. And then I'm just going to take my thread on back to where I want the abdomen to begin, and this is going to be where our tails will start. So I'm just going to take a couple of thread wraps there, then I'm going to move my thread back up forward a little bit, and I'm just going to let it dangle right about there. Now for the tail, I'm going to use Golden Pheasant, which is just a gorgeous material here. You most definitely don't need to do what I just did, but I do like to stack this because I have a hard time getting the beautiful patterns there, and it makes it more striking if those patterns are lined up. And I want this last black bar to be sticking out a little bit from behind the bend of the hook, so that's about where I'm going to want to tie this in. Then I'm just going to pinch really nice and tight to keep that alignment. I'm going to spin my thread counterclockwise so the thread will jump back towards my fingers here instead of towards the eye of the hook. We're just going to get a turn or two in here to secure that material down, and then we'll just go ahead and start moving back. I'll hold on to the end of those Golden Pheasant tail fibers just so that I can keep that on the very top of my hook shank here. So once I've got that, I can let go, and we can see the alignment looks good. So the Royal Trude is really like it's a stimulator pattern, really effective pattern, but you can use it as a stimulator, you can use it to be a stone fly, you can use it as a caddis fly, multi-versatile for sure. So I've cut those ends off right about where I had marked my thread for that 2/3 point. And all I'm doing here is I'm just going to go ahead and clean that up a little bit, and then we'll move on. Next, we're going to turn to some herls from a peacock eye. I'm going to use 2 of them because we're going to have some floss right in the middle of everything. So I'll just take one of the 2. I'm going to clip off the very tip of it just because that's where it's most delicate and still not very puffy. And we like the puffiness that peacock herl will give to us. And from there, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll secure that onto our hook with a couple of thread wraps, just like so. And then I'm going to take my thread back to where I want the abdomen on this fly to start. And I do not want to crank down hard on the thread here because it will cut through the stem on that peacock herl. And if that's what happens, then it will break right off. The other thing that I will do, we're talking proportions, body proportions here. I'm going to let my thread dangle about where I want this peacock herl to end for the back end. So I've got it tied in. I'm going to hold it straight up and away. I'm going to exaggerate, not exaggerate, but kind of go around that hook point, because the hook point is another one of our enemies here. If you hit the stem of your peacock with that hook point, you're going to have a really high probability of just breaking that herl right off. That point will cut right through the stem. So keeping an eye on my measurements there, we're about where I want to be. I'm going to keep the tension on here. I'm going to back my thread off a few wraps while keeping that tension on. Then I'm going to just take a wrap over the top, and that's just going to lock this first bunch of peacock herl into place. Take a few wraps in front of it as well. I can release that from my hackle plier at that point. And then we'll just come in with our scissors. And I want to cut this herl off pretty close to where that stem got tied off. So next we're going to use some red floss here. I've already cut a piece off, and I'm going to wrap that floss around that my bobbin, the thread there. And once I've got that doubled, basically doubled over that, we're going to go ahead and hold that near the top of the shank of our hook. And then I'm just going to wrap backwards over the top of it, and that's going to be what secures this in place. So I want it to come back to right about where we had our peacock curls end. And then I'm going to move my thread back up forward, and I'm going to leave that thread dangling right where I want that floss body to end. And this red floss, we'll work our way up, and I'll chat while we're doing that, is what really makes this a royal Trude. And it helps if you hold on to the floss. Just a tip. Where was I? Yeah, the Royal flies typically have this nice green peacock herl mixed with a nice rich red floss material. So a Royal Wolf is another wonderful pattern. This is the Royal Trude, not the Royal Wolf. But it has the same kind of configuration where you've got red floss surrounded by green peacock curl. So once I've got that floss in place, I'm just going to turn my vise sideways so I can see it. Clip off the balance of that floss. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to wrap over the top of some of that floss here. We've got our first herl in place. We've got our floss in place. We're now going to tie in our second piece of peacock curl here. We'll just make sure that that's nice and secure. And then I'm going to bring it back where I want to start wrapping it. And I want to be relatively gentle. I'm not going to be cranking down on this thread here, because if I do, I'm going to cut right through the stem, kind of like we talked about before. With that, I'll just go ahead and move my thread up forwards, let it hang, reach over, we'll grab our hackle pliers here and attach that to our peacock curl. I'm going to stand that peacock curl up nice. We don't want to pull too hard because it'll break, but we do want it tight enough that, number one, it doesn't come unwound, but number two, it'll make those fibers on that peacock curl stand up a lot better. So I'm just going to work my way back up to about where I had my thread. My thread's currently making its way up towards the eye of the hook as I make these wraps, which is okay. I'm going to keep the tension on that peacock curl. I'll back off that thread that's been winding as we're winding on that herl. And once I've got that in position, I'm just going to put that over the top of this herl here. Give it a couple of wraps just so that we get that nice and locked into position where we want it. I'll take another wrap or two on the other side. I can let go with my pliers, and that should pretty much stay in place. So with that, I'm just going to come in and we're going to go ahead and clip that peacock curl off as close to the thread as we can. Next, we're going to tie in our wing. I'm going to use calf hide for this. I like it a little bit better than the tail. It's a little less coarse. The calf tail tends to be really coarse. And I go ahead and stack this. I know that's not necessary, but this will kind of poke out all over the place anyway. So I want to start out with something that's, somewhat clean. And I'm going to want this wing to go over the bend of the hook. So I'm just going to take that measurement there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place those fibers here on the top of the shank of the hook. Take at least one good solid wrap here to lock that in place. I'll move up a little bit just to make sure I've got it locked in place. And then I'm going to wrap back to where our peacock herl that we just tied in ends. And the reason I like to do this wing all the way up to behind the eye is we are going to put a hackle on here. We're going to put a brown hackle on. And by taking this calf fur all the way up to the front, it's going to create a very nice, uniform space for me to tie in my hackle. So I've got a brown hackle. You can kind of see where we are right at the moment. You'll notice, hopefully, that I've got a lot of stem here, but I've also taken some fibers off the top here. Not on the bottom, but on the top part there. And that's going to be where I've stripped some of those fibers off, are going to be tied in closest to or against the shank here. So I'm just going to go ahead and we'll get this attached. And I'm going to pull up on this just a little bit because I want to get a little bit more stem sticking out. That'll help this feather stand out a little bit better. And then I'm going to take a wrap on the other side of that stem, and you can see what it did is it made this hackle feather stand up really, really nicely, which is what we're going for. So I'm just going to now take a couple of wraps behind it, back by that wing, just so that we make sure that we've got it nice and secure in place. And then I'm going to go ahead and start working my way up towards the eye of the hook here. And that stem, the balance of that stem, is going to follow me along the way. Got some sort of fuzz going on here. Not opposed to fuzz. With that, I'm just going to turn my vise a little bit sideways so I can see where that stem is, and I'm going to clip that stem out of there. So at this point, all I've done is move my bobbin over onto the bobbin cradle, just to give me a little bit of extra space to move, and then I'm just going to clip in with my hackle pliers here onto this piece of hackle. And because I have some of that stem showing, it allows me to make a couple of turns there that are nice and clean, and then I'm just going to slowly work my way up. And that's why it's so good to have a uniform platform for this hackle to go up. It'll just stay together much nicer. So once I get to about there, we're going to go ahead and take our thread off. I want to maintain tension on my hackle here because I do not want this to come unwrapped. And we'll just go ahead and throw our thread over the top of that piece of hackle just to lock it in place. Maybe take a wrap or two on the other side as well. With that done, I can release my hackle pliers, and that shouldn't go anywhere. I'm going to come in with my scissors, and I want to trim this in really close to right where that stem is meeting the thread. Which should give us a nice clean finish. With all that in place, we're going to go ahead and do another whip finish here. Build up just the tiniest hint of a head. So there you've got it, the Royal Trude. Beautiful pattern, a lot of fun to tie. It's going to work as a stimulator, as a caddis, as a stonefly. Grab yourself a hook, throw it in your vise, and give it a go.